The ballroom of the Hartwell Grand Hotel had never looked more magnificent than it did on the evening of October 14th. Thousands of crystal droplets cascaded from chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls above tables draped in ivory silk. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition, that particular cocktail that only the wealthiest rooms in America seemed to produce. Flower arrangements taller than most children stood sentinel at every corner, pale roses and white orchids arranged by florists who charged more per hour than most people earned in a day. This was the Hartwell Foundation annual charity gala, the most anticipated social event in Chicago's elite calendar, and every person in attendance had been chosen with surgical precision. Every person, that is, except Elena Vasquez. Elena had arrived 40 minutes early because that was what her job required. She worked for Premier Event Staffing, a company that placed servers, cleaners, and general hospitality workers at events exactly like this one. Tonight, she was assigned to the east wing of the ballroom, the section closest to the main stage, the section where the wealthiest tables were arranged like a constellation of power and privilege. She wore the standard uniform, black slacks, a white button-down shirt, and flat black shoes. The shoes were borrowed from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, because Elena's own black flats had finally given out 3 weeks ago, and she hadn't yet saved enough to replace them. They were half a size too small and pinched at the toes, but Elena had learned long ago that discomfort was something you simply absorbed and continued moving through. She was 28 years old, with dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, brown eyes that held a particular kind of quiet intelligence, and hands that were perpetually a little rough from cleaning products and cold water. She was not beautiful in the way that the women arriving in this ballroom were beautiful. She didn't have the kind of beauty that came from leisure, from weekly blowouts and monthly facials and the effortless glow that expensive skincare produced. But she had something those women couldn't buy, a bone-deep genuineness, a warmth that radiated from her even when she was exhausted, even when her feet ached, even when she had been awake since 5 in the morning and would not be home until well past midnight. Tonight, that midnight return was the detail pressing most heavily on Elena's mind. Because tonight, for the first time in 3 years of working events like this, Elena had brought her daughter. Lily was 3 years old. She had her mother's dark eyes and her late father's stubborn little chin, and she had been running a slight fever for 2 days that had broken that morning, breaking just in time to create the crisis Elena now found herself managing. Her usual babysitter, her neighbor's teenage daughter Kayla, had called at 3 in the afternoon with her own emergency, a car accident, minor but terrifying, that had left her shaken and at the emergency room for observation. Elena's backup, her friend Marissa, was in Milwaukee for a work conference. Her mother lived in Phoenix and couldn't get to Chicago in time, and the agency's policy on cancellations within 4 hours of an event was unambiguous. 2 cancellations in 12 months, and you were removed from the roster. This was Elena's second cancellation window this year. The first had been in February, when a water pipe burst in their apartment building and Elena had been forced to stay with Lily in a hotel paid for by emergency housing funds. So Elena had done what mothers who have no other options do. She had packed Lily's favorite blanket, a faded yellow thing with a satin edge that Lily called Sunny, along with her stuffed elephant, 3 juice boxes, a container of crackers, and her small portable tablet loaded with downloaded episodes of her favorite cartoon. She had explained to her daughter, with the particular seriousness one reserves for 3-year-olds who are old enough to understand tone, if not every word, that Mama had to work tonight and Lily needed to be very, very quiet. Quiet like a mouse. Lily had asked, her eyes solemn. Quieter, Elena had said. Quiet like a sleeping mouse. Lily had considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Okay, Mama. The event coordinator, a brittle woman named Diane Worthington with a clipboard she wielded like a weapon, had discovered Elena's situation during the pre-event staff briefing. She had pulled Elena aside with a grip on her elbow that was firm to the point of rudeness. "You cannot have a child here," Diane had said flatly. "She'll stay in the storage alcove off the east corridor," Elena had explained, having already located it and assessed it as safe, carpeted, warm, with an outlet for the tablet charger, tucked far enough from the ballroom that noise wouldn't travel. "She won't make a sound. She won't be seen. I just need this job tonight, please. I can't cancel again." Diane had studied her with the expression of someone calculating risk against inconvenience. "If that child makes a single sound that reaches the ballroom," she'd said finally, "you're out. Permanently. And you'll be responsible for any complaints from guests." "She won't," Elena had promised. And she had believed it. She had believed it completely. She had settled Lily in the alcove with her blanket and her elephant and her tablet, the volume turned low enough that Elena could barely hear it standing 2 feet away. She had kissed her daughter's forehead and pressed her palm against her small cheek, still warm, but the fever warm was gone, replaced by the ordinary warmth of a healthy, drowsy child. "I'll check on you every 20 minutes, Elena had promised. "Okay, Mama." Lily had already been pulling up her cartoon, her little fingers navigating the tablet with the unsettling competence of a modern toddler. "I'll be the sleeping mouse." Elena had walked back into the ballroom with the particular posture of someone who has decided that worry is a luxury she cannot afford right now. She picked up her tray. She began to work. For the first 90 minutes, everything was fine. The guests arrived in waves, men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than Elena's rent, which was already uncomfortably high for a 2-bedroom apartment on Chicago's northwest side that she shared with Lily in what was technically a 1-bedroom, Lily sleeping in the bedroom while Elena slept on the pull-out sofa in the living room. She had never told anyone this. It was simply the arrangement that worked. She moved through the tables efficiently, refreshing glasses, removing appetizer plates, delivering the small amuse-bouche cards that explained each course with language so elaborate it felt like a different language entirely. She was good at this work, not because she loved it, but because she was the kind of person who did every task as well as it could be done, regardless of whether anyone noticed. Several guests looked through her entirely, the particular practiced invisibility that wealth sometimes inflicted on service workers. A few were genuinely kind, a small thank you, eye contact, a smile. She noted those people the way you note small kindnesses when you're tired, gratefully, warmly, storing them away. Then she noticed the man at table 1. He was young for the seat he occupied, the centermost table, the one reserved for the evening's primary donor. 33, maybe, with dark hair and the kind of quiet self-possession that didn't need to announce itself. He wasn't performing for the room the way several of the other wealthy men were. He wasn't holding court or laughing too loudly or touching his companion's arm to underscore a point. He was listening mostly, watching the room with eyes that seemed to be recording more than they let on. His name, Elena would learn later, was Marcus Hartwell. She didn't know it yet when she refilled his water glass. She didn't know it yet when she noticed that he was the only person at table 1 who said thank you. She was thinking about Lily. By the second hour of the gala, the champagne had done its quiet work of loosening inhibitions among the people who could least afford to lose them, not financially, but morally. There is a particular cruelty that emerges in rooms full of the extremely wealthy when they feel sufficiently insulated from consequence, and the Hartwell Grand's East Wing ballroom had reached that critical temperature somewhere around the 3rd course. It started, as these things often do, with a woman who was deeply unhappy with herself and had learned to redirect that unhappiness outward with tremendous efficiency. Her name was Claudia Brennan Whitfield. She was 44, the wife of a hedge fund director, dressed in a gown that was undeniably stunning, sapphire blue, custom-made, the kind of garment that was constructed rather than merely sewn. She had the sharpened prettiness of a woman who had invested significantly in her appearance as a professional strategy, and she wielded her looks the way some people wield law degrees, as tools for establishing dominance. She sat at table 2, adjacent to Marcus Hartwell's table, and she had been watching Elena work for the better part of an hour with the expression of someone who finds a particular kind of satisfaction in identifying weakness in others. "These agency girls," Claudia said to the woman beside her, a socialite named Portia Langley who wore her money more quietly but wielded her judgment just as sharply. "They look so exhausted. It's almost uncomfortable to watch." Portia made a sound that could have been agreement or discomfort. She was not a kind woman, but she was a careful one. "That one," Claudia continued, nodding toward Elena with a slight movement of her champagne flute, "has been dropping things all night." She dropped a napkin near table 4. "Did you see it? Just picked it up like it was nothing." She said this as though dropping a napkin was a character failing of the deepest order. Elena had, in fact, dropped a napkin. It had slid off a tray when a guest pushed back his chair unexpectedly. She had retrieved it calmly, replaced it, and continued. She had not thought about it since. But Claudia had. "They hire these people," Claudia went on, warming to her subject with the enthusiasm of someone who has found an audience that isn't stopping them, and then they wonder why service quality has gone down. "You can tell she doesn't want to be here. She has that look. That resentful look." Elena did not have a resentful look. Elena had an exhausted look, which is a different thing, but Claudia had never been exhausted in a way that showed on her face, and so she could not distinguish between the two. What Elena actually had on her face, at the moment Claudia was delivering this assessment, was a subtle furrow of worry that she could not entirely suppress. She had done her 20-minute check on Lily at the 90-minute mark and found her daughter sleeping, curled around her elephant with Sunny draped over her small shoulder and the tablet dark, its battery preserved. She had exhaled with relief, so profound it felt almost physical. But it had been 28 minutes now since that check, and the faint anxiety that lived permanently in the back of every single mother's mind was beginning to surface. She moved efficiently, keeping her attention split the way she always did, present enough for the work, aware enough to monitor the door to the east corridor. At table 3, she encountered the second layer of this evening's cruelty. Preston Vale was 38, the kind of man who had been handsome enough in his 20s to develop a relationship with his own looks that had never matured past that decade. He had that specific confidence of men who have never been told no by anyone who had power over them, and he expressed it in ways that were technically within the bounds of social acceptability while being profoundly unpleasant to experience. "Hey," he said, as Elena reached past him to clear his plate. Not politely. Just hey. The way you might address a dog. "Yes, sir? Can I get you something?" "You can get me a smile," he said, with an expression that suggested he considered this charming. "You look like you're at a funeral." Several people at table 3 laughed. Not all of them. 2 women at the far end of the table had the grace to look at their plates. But enough. "I apologize," Elena said, because her job required her to absorb things like this without responding the way she wanted to. "I'll try to." "Where are you from?" Preston interrupted. "Originally, I mean." The question landed in the air with its full weight. Elena understood exactly what was being asked and exactly what was not being asked, and she understood that any answer she gave would be used to further establish the distance between herself and this room that these people were so invested in maintaining. "Chicago," she said simply. "Excuse me." She moved away. Behind her, she heard Preston say something in a lowered voice that prompted another round of laughter. She didn't catch the specific words. She had trained herself not to catch those words, because catching them required holding them, and holding them cost something she couldn't afford. At the staff station near the kitchen corridor, she set down her tray and pressed her hands flat against the cool metal surface for just a moment. Just a moment of stillness. Then she picked up the tray and turned back toward the ballroom. She was intercepted by Diane Worthington. "Table 1, Diane said quietly, consulting her clipboard. "Mr. Hartwell's water needs refreshing, and the bread course should have gone out 3 minutes ago." "On it," Elena said. "And Elena." Diane lowered her voice further, and something in her tone had shifted, not to kindness, exactly, but to a kind of clipped warning that carried a different quality than her usual sharpness. "I overheard some of the guests from Table 3. Comments about the staff." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. "Don't engage. Just do your work." "I don't engage," Elena said quietly. "Good." Diane moved away. Elena delivered the bread to Table 1. She refilled Marcus Hartwell's water glass without interrupting the conversation he was having with the elderly gentleman to his left, a conversation that seemed to be about bridge renovation funding in the South Side. Not the kind of topic she would have expected at a table like this one, and not the kind of conversation she would have expected from a 33-year-old billionaire. He noticed her work. He moved his arm slightly to make her task easier without breaking the thread of what he was saying. He said "thank you" again, the same way he'd said it before. Not performed, just real. She had made it back to the staff station when the sound reached her. Not loud. Not a cry. Not a wail. Not the kind of sound that would have carried through a ballroom full of conversation and clattering silverware. It was smaller than that. A confused, sleepy, disoriented sound. The sound a 3-year-old makes when she wakes in an unfamiliar dark place and cannot immediately locate her mother. "Mama?" Elena was already moving, but she was not the only one who heard it. The alcove door, she had left it slightly ajar for air circulation, was positioned at the corner of the east corridor where it met the ballroom service entrance. And in the particular acoustic accident of high-ceilinged rooms, the small sound had traveled. Claudia Brennan Whitfield turned toward it first. Elena reached the alcove in 34 seconds. She had counted them later, in the particular way that trauma creates its own timestamps. Lily was sitting up, her elephant clutched to her chest, her dark eyes wide and swimming with the specific panic of a child who has woken somewhere unfamiliar. The yellow blanket was bunched at her waist. Her hair had come loose from the small braid Elena had plaited that morning and curled around her face in the way it always did when she slept. "Mama," she said again, and then Elena was there, on her knees on the carpeted floor, pulling her daughter close. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're okay? I'm here." Lily pressed her face into Elena's shoulder, and her small body shook with a kind of crying that is more relief than terror. The crying that says, "I was afraid, and now I'm safe, and I need to let the fear out now that I can." Elena held her and rocked her and murmured into her hair, that automatic stream of reassurance that mothers produce like breath. "You were so brave. You were my sleeping mouse. You did so well, baby. I'm right here." It took perhaps 2 minutes for Lily to settle. 2 minutes during which Elena was aware, in the back of her mind, of the time ticking away, of the bread course she hadn't finished distributing, of Diane Worthington's clipboard and its permanent record of infractions. When Lily's breathing had steadied to something approaching calm, she pulled back and looked at her mother with eyes that were still wet but serious. "I couldn't find you," she said, with the gravity of a child reporting a significant event. "I know. I was just outside. I'm sorry I wasn't right here when you woke up." The movie stopped, Lily said, as if this explained everything. And it did, really. The tablet had died, the familiar voices had gone silent, and in the sudden quiet Lily had surfaced from sleep into confusion. I know, sweetheart. We'll charge it. Are you hungry? I want crackers, Lily said, with the decisive specificity of toddlers everywhere. We have crackers. Elena reached for the container. Her hands were steadier than she felt. Can you be my very quiet mouse for a little bit longer? Just a little longer, and then we can go home. Lily accepted crackers and considered the proposition. How much longer? 2 hours. Lily's face did the math in the way that 3-year-olds do math, which is to say she assessed the emotional rather than numerical content of the statement. That's a lot, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Lily looked at her for a moment with those dark, serious eyes that sometimes made Elena feel she was being seen more completely than she was entirely comfortable with. Then she said, with the simple pragmatism of someone who has already decided, Okay, Mama. I'll be quiet. Elena kissed her forehead, plugged in the tablet, stood up, and found herself looking at Claudia Brennan-Whitfield. The woman was standing in the corridor outside the alcove, and beside her was Portia Langley, and behind them at a slightly greater distance were 2 other women Elena had noticed at nearby tables. They had followed the sound. They had followed Elena. And now they stood in the corridor, with the expressions of people who have discovered something they intend to use. I knew it, Claudia said softly. Not to Elena. To the women around her, as though Elena were not present. She brought a child. To a formal event. To serve at a formal event. She said the word child the way you might say the word contraband. Elena straightened. She's in the alcove, she said carefully. She's not in the ballroom. She's not disturbing anyone. She disturbed me, Claudia said. I heard her. I apologize for that. It won't happen again. No, Claudia agreed, and the word carried a satisfaction that made Elena's stomach tighten. It won't, because I'm going to find that coordinator and make sure this situation is dealt with. Please, Elena said. She had not intended to say that word. She had not intended to say anything that put her in the position of asking anything from this woman. But it came out because she was tired and afraid, and the word please, in that moment, was the most honest word she had. Claudia heard it land. She registered it. And something moved behind her eyes that might have been the faintest flicker of something human, but if it was there, it was brief. You should have thought of that before you dragged your child to a gala, she said. The women behind her murmured. One of them, Portia Langley, looked at the floor. Elena stood in the corridor and felt the familiar architecture of helplessness assembling itself around her. She knew this feeling. She had grown up in it, fought her way partway out of it, and had learned that the walls had a way of rebuilding themselves just when you thought you'd cleared them. She thought about her roster spot at Premier Event Staffing. She thought about the rent that was due in 11 days. She thought about the shoes that pinched her toes, which were Mrs. Patterson's shoes, which she would return tomorrow and still have no replacement for. She thought about Lily. She turned back to the alcove. I need to get back to work, she said, with a steadiness she did not entirely possess. I'm sorry for the disruption. She had taken 2 steps when she heard Lily's voice from the alcove, small and clear and utterly innocent of the conversation that had just occurred. Mama. Who is that lady? Elena closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second. Then she said, No one you need to worry about, baby. Watch your show. But Lily had apparently seen Claudia through the alcove door, because the next thing Elena heard was Lily's small feet on the carpet, And then, before Elena could turn around quickly enough, Lily had emerged from the alcove and was standing in the corridor, her elephant dangling from one hand, her dark eyes moving between her mother and the woman who had made her mother's voice sound tight and afraid. Lily walked to Elena and took her hand. Then she looked at Claudia Brennan-Whitfield with the unself-conscious directness of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned that there are people you are supposed to look away from. "You made my mama sad," Lily said. Simply, factually. The corridor went completely quiet. People had too much at stake to speak that directly to her. But this small person with the stuffed elephant and the crackers still on her lip was looking at her with an expression entirely free of strategy or deference, and the words had come out with the precision of something that cost nothing to say because it was simply true. "You made my mama sad," Lily said again, in case the statement had not been fully received the first time. Claudia's mouth opened. Then it closed. "Lily, come here," Elena said softly, pulling her daughter back, moving her toward the alcove. Her face was burning with an emotion that was approximately equal parts humiliation and a ferocious, helpless pride. "I'm sorry," she said to Claudia, because her job still required it, because the roster spot still mattered, because the rent was still 11 days away. "She's 3. She doesn't understand." "I understand," Lily said, from the position of someone who considers herself quite well-informed, and Elena almost laughed. She almost laughed in the middle of one of the worst professional moments of her life, because Lily was 3 and she did understand, in the way that children understand the emotional truth of situations with a clarity that adults have long since learned to complicate. What happened next was determined by a footstep. Specifically, a footstep that Elena recognized, heavier, more deliberate than a woman's heel, coming down the east corridor. She turned, and Marcus Hartwell was standing at the corridor's entrance. He had apparently followed the small exodus from the ballroom with the same quiet attentiveness he'd applied to everything else this evening. He stood at the corridor's entrance, and he looked at the assembled scene. Claudia and her companions, Elena with her daughter's hand clasped in hers, Lily regarding the room with unblinking seriousness, and he said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Claudia. "Mrs. Brennan-Whitfield," he said, in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and somehow entirely definitive. "Diane was looking for you at your table. Something about the auction catalog, I believe." It was not true. Elena would figure out later that it was not true. But it was said with such easeful confidence that no one questioned it, and the dismissal it contained was wrapped in such impeccable courtesy that Claudia could not respond to it without revealing that she understood she was being dismissed, which would have required her to admit that she'd been doing something worth being dismissed from. She left. Her companions followed her. Portia Langley glanced back once at Elena with an expression that might, in better circumstances, have been an apology. Then it was just Elena and Lily and Marcus Hartwell in the East Corridor. He looked at Elena with an expression that she would spend a long time afterward trying to accurately describe. It was not pity. She was experienced enough with pity to recognize it and despise it, and this was not it. It was something closer to recognition. The look of someone who has seen a thing clearly and is acknowledging that it has been seen. "Is she yours?" he asked, nodding toward Lily. "Yes." "I'm so sorry. She wasn't supposed to come into the—" "What's her name?" he asked. "Not Elena's. Lily's." Lily, who had assessed this tall man and apparently reached a positive conclusion about him, straightened slightly. "Lily Elena Vasquez," she said, deploying her full name with considerable dignity. Something shifted in Marcus Hartwell's expression. A warmth that came from somewhere genuine. "That's a very good name," he said seriously. "I know," Lily agreed. Elena pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, because the laugh that was trying to escape her was going to be embarrassing. I can take her back to the alcove, she managed. She won't. What's the alcove? Marcus asked. The storage room, where she's been staying while I work. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door to the alcove. He looked at Lily. He looked at Elena. How long has she been in there? Since 6:30, Elena said, because she had stopped being able to manage her honesty in the last few minutes. Something about the accumulated weight of the evening had stripped away her capacity for careful presentation. I couldn't find a babysitter. I couldn't cancel again. This is my second time in the window, and they'd remove me from the roster. She was asleep. She just woke up. He nodded slowly. Is she hungry? She has crackers. That's not what I asked. Elena stopped. She looked at this man who had said thank you twice and moved his arm to make her work easier and sent Claudia Brennan-Whitfield away with one pleasantly delivered sentence. I don't know what you're. There's a staff lounge 2 doors down, Marcus said. It has food. Real food, not crackers. He looked at Lily again. Would you like something to eat? Lily looked at her mother. Elena looked at Marcus Hartwell. I'm working, she said. I know. I'll speak to Diane. He said this the way people say things when they are accustomed to their words functioning as action, but without the arrogance that usually accompanied that kind of assurance. He said it the way someone says I'll take care of it when they simply intend to take care of it. You don't need to do that, Elena said. I don't want special. Mrs. Brennan-Whitfield was going to get you fired, he said simply. I'd like to make sure that doesn't happen. This is the least complicated way to do that. He paused. Unless you'd prefer I didn't. Elena was quiet for a moment. Lily tugged her hand and whispered, Mama, the man is nice. I know, baby, Elena said softly. She looked at Marcus Hartwell. Why? She asked. Because she had learned that when people offered things, it was important to understand what they were offering and from where the offer came. He was quiet for a moment, as though the question deserved actual consideration rather than a reflexive answer. When I was 7, he said finally, my mother worked 2 jobs. Sometimes she took me with her to the second one. She'd set me up in a corner with a book. He looked at the alcove door. I remember what that corner felt like. Elena felt something unodd in her chest that had been wound tight for a very long time. There's a children's plate in the kitchen, he said. Pasta. My chef always sends one for the kids of staff, which I realized Diane didn't tell you about because Diane operates primarily as a compliance mechanism rather than a human being. Elena laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. Genuine and a little startled and entirely undignified for a formal event corridor. Lily laughed too, because her mother was laughing, and Lily treated her mother's laughter as the best possible signal. Come on, Marcus Hartwell said. And because Elena had run out of reasons to refuse that weren't actually just fear wearing the costume of professionalism, she followed him, with Lily's hand in hers, down the east corridor. The thing that changed everything happened at 9:47 p.m. in the full sight of the Hartwell Foundation annual charity gala, with 300 of Chicago's most prominent citizens as witnesses. Elena had, with considerable negotiation with both Diane Worthington and her own pride, been reassigned to the kitchen assistant's role for the remainder of the evening, a compromise that Marcus had apparently arranged in a 2-minute conversation with Diane that Elena had not witnessed, but whose efficiency she deeply appreciated. Lily had eaten pasta at a small table in the staff lounge, with the focused solemnity of a child who is extremely hungry and considering the pasta her full-time occupation. The tablet had charged. Lily had watched 20 minutes of her cartoon. She had then announced she was not tired and immediately fallen asleep on the staff lounge couch with the certainty of a person who has made her point. Elena had covered her with Sunny and returned to the kitchen. She was carrying a tray of dessert components through the service corridor at 9:47 when she heard Lily's voice in the ballroom. Not in the corridor. In the ballroom. She set the tray down so quickly that a ramekin slid and had to be caught by the pastry chef beside her, and she was through the service door before anyone could comment. What she found, when she entered the ballroom, was a sight that would be replayed in her memory for the rest of her life with a particular clarity of moments that matter. Lily, in her small clothes with her elephant and her faded yellow blanket, standing in the center of the ballroom between table 1 and the main stage, looking entirely comfortable, having apparently navigated from the staff lounge with the directional confidence of a child who operates primarily on instinct. She had, it seemed, woken up. She had noted that her mother was not present. She had decided to remedy this. And she had found, instead, the ballroom. 300 people had gone quiet. Not all at once. It was a gradual quiet, one table noticing and then another, conversation dying in concentric circles the way sounds die when something unexpected enters a space. By the time Elena reached the ballroom's edge, the room was entirely silent. Lily was looking at the tables with the expression of someone who finds them interesting but not intimidating. She had apparently been in the process of walking toward the stage. Perhaps she had heard the microphone, perhaps she had seen the lights, when she had stopped, because she had seen something that interested her more. She had seen Marcus Hartwell's chair at table 1, which was empty. He had stepped away moments earlier to consult with the event's MC. The chair was large and well-cushioned and positioned at the center of the room's most prominent table, and to a 3-year-old who had spent the better part of 6 hours in an alcove and a staff lounge, it was a throne. Lily walked to it with complete confidence. She set her elephant on the table, which caused a collective intake of breath from table 1's remaining occupants, and then she climbed up onto the chair. It was a significant undertaking. The chair was not built for a 3-year-old, but Lily Vasquez was her mother's daughter, which meant she was not deterred by things being difficult, only interested in solving the difficulty. She made it up, by way of the chair's arm, and then a heroic small scramble, and she settled herself in the seat with the expression of someone who has arrived. Elena was moving through the room, unable to breathe. Lily looked out at the ballroom. 300 people looked back at her. And then Lily Vasquez, age 3, said the thing she said. She said it loudly and clearly, and with the absolute conviction of someone delivering important information. She said it because it was the thing in her mind, which is the only criterion a 3-year-old requires for saying something. She said, "My mama works very, very hard." The room was so quiet that everyone heard it. "She works all the time," Lily continued, because she had started now, and the logic of continuation was clear to her. "And she's very tired. And she makes me breakfast even when she's tired. And she reads me stories even when she's tired. And she always comes back for me. Even in the dark, she comes back." Elena had stopped moving. She was standing between table 4 and table 5, and her hand was over her mouth, and her eyes were burning. "She's the best mama," Lily said, with the authority of someone whose conclusion has been carefully reached and is beyond dispute. "The whole best." She looked around the room again, apparently satisfied with the delivery of this information. Then, as though she had just noticed the elephant on the table, she retrieved it and hugged it and looked around the ballroom again with curiosity rather than concern. The first person to start clapping was Marcus Hartwell. He had returned from the stage area and was standing at the edge of the room, and he started to applaud slowly and genuinely, and it took less than 3 seconds for the entire ballroom to follow him. Not politely, not the performative applause of charity galas when a donor says something quotable. Genuinely. The way rooms sometimes respond to something that has slipped past all the carefully constructed defenses of sophistication and expense and landed directly on the truth. Elena reached table 1. She lifted her daughter from Marcus Hartwell's chair. Lily was unbothered by any of this. She permitted herself to be lifted, adjusted her elephant, and said into her mother's ear, "I found you, Mama." "You found me," Elena agreed. She was crying, which she had not cried since Lily's father died, and which she had not anticipated crying here, not in front of 300 people and crystal chandeliers and women in sapphire gowns. "Don't cry," Lily said, with the practical concern of a 3-year-old who considers her mother's tears a problem to be solved. She put her small hand on Elena's cheek. "I'm here." "I know, baby," Elena said. "I know." She became aware, in the way you become aware of things when you are crying in public and your 3-year-old is holding your face, that the applause had not stopped. She became aware of Marcus Hartwell standing 2 feet away, and of the expression on his face, and of the particular quality of a room that has been changed by something it didn't expect. She became aware of Claudia Brennan-Whitfield at table 2, who was not applauding but was looking at Elena and Lily with an expression that was, for the first time that evening, entirely unguarded. It was not a comfortable expression. It was the expression of someone experiencing something that does not serve them. Elena did not have the capacity to feel satisfaction about this. She was too busy being held by her daughter. Marcus Hartwell called premier event staffing the following morning. He did not call to complain. He called to offer Elena Vesquez a position. This was not, he was careful to explain when he reached her through the agency's referral contact, she had left on the event's paperwork a charity arrangement. He was expanding his foundation's community outreach division and needed a coordinator, someone who could interface between the foundation's programs and the communities they were intended to serve, someone who understood what those communities actually needed rather than what donors assumed they needed. He had watched her work the previous evening for 4 hours and formed some opinions. Elena did not say yes immediately. She said she needed 24 hours to think about it, which was not because she was uncertain but because she had learned to be careful with things that seemed too good, having spent a number of years discovering that things that seemed too good had a way of being too good for a reason. She spent those 24 hours researching the Hartwell Foundation. She found that it was legitimate, that its financials were publicly filed and showed that 83 cents of every donated dollar reached its intended programming, that its community partners across Chicago consistently described it in positive terms, and that its founder had, 12 years earlier at the age of 21, endowed a scholarship fund at his late mother's community college in her name. His mother's name had been Clara. The scholarship was called the Clara Hartwell Award for Working Mothers. Elena called back at exactly the 24-hour mark and said yes. She would later say that the scholarship fund was not the reason she said yes. The reason she said yes was that she had spent the 24 hours also examining her own life with the clear-eyed honesty that she was capable of when she gave herself the time, and she had understood something that the previous night, Lily in the chair, the applause, 28 minutes between check-ins, borrowed shoes, the alcove's carpeted floor, had clarified. She was not afraid of hard work. She had never been afraid of hard work. What she was afraid of was hard work that led nowhere, that accumulated without destination, that required her to absorb the Preston Vallas and the Claudia Brennan-Whitfields of the world in exchange for a roster spot she was perpetually one canceled babysitter away from losing. She was afraid of a life that asked Lily to be the sleeping mouse forever. The position at the Hartwell Foundation changed things. Not immediately. The first 6 months were their own kind of difficulty, a new kind of challenge, learning the grammar of a different environment, navigating the particular politics of philanthropic organizations while remaining true to the directness she had developed as a person who had never been able to afford to be indirect. But they were challenges with a different quality. They were challenges that were taking her somewhere. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in April. Lily got her own room, which she decorated herself with the decisive aesthetic of someone who has been consulted on a major creative project. Elephant poster, yellow curtains, an enormous quantity of stuffed animals that she organized in a hierarchy, she explained to Elena with great seriousness. Elena bought her own black flats. And then she bought a second pair, brown ones, for the sake of it, for the sheer ordinary luxury of having 2 pairs of shoes. Lily started preschool. She made friends with the same unself-conscious ease with which she had addressed the entire Hartwell Gala audience, because Lily operated from a fundamental assumption that people were worth knowing until they demonstrated otherwise, which Elena privately considered the most sophisticated philosophical position she had ever encountered in a 3-year-old. Marcus Hartwell was, over the course of the first year, gradually less her employer and more her colleague, and then more than that, in the way that these transitions happen when 2 people who respect each other are given time and proximity and enough honest conversations. He brought Lily a stuffed elephant on the 3rd month of Elena's employment, not because he thought it was a grand gesture, but because he had noticed that her elephant was losing stuffing and had mentioned it to someone who had mentioned it to him, and he had thought it was a solvable problem. Lily had examined the new elephant with great seriousness, decided it was acceptable, and given it the name Gerald, which no one had suggested and which she considered definitive. She kept the old elephant too. Some things, she explained, you kept even when you had new ones. This was, Elena thought, one of the truest things she had ever heard. There is a photograph that was taken at the following year's Hartwell Foundation Gala, the one that Elena helped organize, in her new capacity, with Diane Worthington, who had decided that since Elena was now on the foundation staff, she would treat her with a guarded professional courtesy that occasionally, under the right conditions, approached warmth. In the photograph, Elena is at the center of the room in a dress that she bought herself, deep green, the kind of dress she could not have imagined owning a year earlier. Lily is beside her in a small matching dress, holding Gerald the elephant, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who considers herself to be in precisely the right place. Marcus Hartwell is on Elena's other side, and the expression on his face is the one she has come to know best, the one that has nothing in it of performance or audience awareness, the one that is simply there because it cannot help being there. On the night of that photograph, Lily would walk to the microphone during the program's intermission, because Lily had observed that the microphone was not currently being used and that she had things to say, and she would address the assembled guests with the same ease she had brought to her first unscheduled appearance in this world. She would say, "Last year I sat in a big chair, and my mama was there, and everybody clapped. I remember." She would say, "My mama is the best mama in the world. She always comes back." She would say, "Thank you for being nice to her now." And the room, full of some of the same people who had been there a year earlier, including Portia Langley, who had started a foundation contribution in Lily's name and never fully explained why, would fill with the same kind of applause that had filled it 12 months before. The kind that means something. The kind that a room full of very powerful people produces when a 3-year-old reminds them of what actually matters. Elena would pick up her daughter from the microphone. Lily would put her arms around her mother's neck. Elena would hold her there for a moment in the middle of all those people and all that light. "I love you, Bug," she would say. "I love you, Mama," Lily would say, against her shoulder. And then, with the irresistible accuracy that was her particular gift, "Can we have the pasta again?" Elena would laugh. Marcus would laugh. Even Diane Worthington, standing near the service corridor with her clipboard, would allow herself a brief expression that those who saw it would disagree about for months, whether it was a smile, or something only adjacent to one, or simply the look of a person who has unexpectedly witnessed something true. None of that would matter. What would matter was this: a woman who had worn borrowed shoes, and the daughter, who had climbed into the biggest chair in the room and told the whole world who her mother was. What would matter was that the world had listened. It almost always does. When the truth comes from somewhere, it cannot be doubted. And there is nowhere truth is less deniable than in the voice of a child who loves her mother.